just to throw a little red meat out here in front of Professor Carson, who has identified so many exegetical fallacies, everyone in the world is afraid actually to move to exegesis in front of him. But
it's called the gift of intimidation.
Yes. But to go at one of your central concerns concerning exegetical fallacies, I'll tell you where I see the danger of an extremely superficial knowledge of the biblical languages is that all preachers have is word studies.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. I'll go further. I tell my students,
That's
including...
called red meat.
Yes. Well, you succeeded. You held up a flag and I bit. But I tell my students, even my best students, that if in the first 5 years of their ministry after leaving Trinity, I hear them in any sermon say, "The Greek says," I will personally throttle them. Because the aim of studying the Greek is not to become a kind of priestly class that shuts you off from other people or talking down or whatever. You do your study and then explain what words mean and so on. But even the little phrase "the Greek says" sounds slightly pompous and condescending. Moreover, if a person does only Greek studies and they don't understand syntax, they don't understand how sentences are put together, they don't understand how a paragraph is put together and so on, and all they do is work through a text and look up this word in BDAG and then look up this word in BDAG and then they say well, the literal meaning here is, and then say something that they pull out of BDAG. Good grief, they're doing more damage than good. So Alexander Pope was right, a little learning is a dangerous thing. So part of getting a decent Greek education or Hebrew or whatever it is learning what you don't know, and the best pastors who use the languages are careful about parading that knowledge, and then after you've been in the ministry for 40 years, like John Piper, if he wants to say, as he did yesterday, if he wants to make a big concern out of asphalion in the introduction of Luke, God bless him, I won't throttle him. But on the other hand, in the first 5 years, they deserve throttling.
Consider yourselves warned, lest thou likewise be throttled. In terms of what we're talking about here, though, there's a different point that I think is evident in many of those who founded the theological institutions we know today. And we're a part of the discussion in which the Greek language, especially along with Latin, was prerequisite. James Pettigrew Boyce, when Southern Seminary was established, he gave an address in 1856 entitled "Three Changes in Theological Institutions." And one of the ones he mentioned was that in order to get into one of the theological seminaries, such as Princeton or a similar school, one had to have 12 years of Latin and 10 years of classical Greek. And he made the point, thus not one of the 12 disciples could have been admitted to one of the theological seminaries in the United States. But later in John A. Broadus, there's another very interesting argument that I think is really helpful, in which he said, remember, you're not actually studying a language to study a language. You're studying a language to study a text. And the text is the issue. And I think that's one of the dangers in this discussion. People hear us talking about languages as if linguistics is our main concern. It is the knowledge of the text that is our main concern. You want to elaborate on that?
Well, I simply want to say that that's why the languages are important, because pastors want to focus on Scripture. And there's so much to read today, and there's so much out there that's helpful and illuminating, but the focus, the foundation, the emphasis must be on Scripture, studying Scripture, meditating on Scripture, and I think that includes the languages, having a discipline to focus on the languages. There's exceptions, certainly, but I think it's the focus of an evangelical pastoral ministry.
My dad had the equivalent of a BTH, but at a time when a BTH gave you 3 years of Greek and 2 years of Hebrew. And he was a church planter in French Canada, and he kept sporadic diaries all his life. I used them when I wrote the little book, Memoirs of an Ordinary Pastor. But as I read through his diaries, what's so interesting is that he quotes the Bible constantly, usually from memory. And when he's writing in English, he wrote his diary partly in English, partly in French. Then he'd quote the King James Version, that's what was used then. And then when he was quoting in French, then he'd use the Louis II, which was what was used then. But often when he was quoting Scripture, he might use those languages, but he might quote in Greek. and sometimes in Hebrew. I have a lovely passage from when he was about 78. My mother had died, and he was on his own again, and he was preaching again. And he has this long passage that he's quoted from memory. I can tell because he's got a few errors in it, that he's quoted from 1 John in Greek. And his mind is so full of Scripture from a pretty humble background, but he was so much committed to the Word that it stamped him. And that's what you want to get. You want to get this lifelong commitment to the Word. He would never become a linguistic expert, but he loved the Bible.